What's going on YouTube? Adachi here, back at it again, looking at the man with the most drip, Mita. Mita is a low rarity support unit and he can be easily replaced, but for now he fills a niche role of support buffer while also having some neat built-in survivability. Let's get into it. His moves can be slightly confusing, but definitely not his basic combo. It's a 3-hitter with really nothing of note. It's also his only melee attacks, unless we're counting his counter, but it's pretty satisfying to mash. Now we're going to jump into his strategy because there's an important mechanic to cover. This is a ranged single hit attack. When it hits, its target will then bounce up to 5 times and hit surrounding enemies that haven't been hit yet. Enemies hit by Mita's strategy are inflicted with illusion. You can see the illusion debuff over enemies' heads. Illusion is a debuff that lasts for 10 seconds, it taunts enemies, and the next single attack that would land on Mita will instead be automatically dodged, consuming stamina. If an attack is dodged via illusion, Mita will gain 1 stack of Energize, and these cap at 3. Going into Energize, we can now look at Mita's secondary, another ranged attack that deals 3 hits and okayish break. If Mita has 3 stacks of Energize, this will instead perform an alternate action that buffs the nearest teammate within a certain range. The range is pretty decent, but you have to be relatively near them, otherwise it will just buff Mita. The buff granted is 5 stacks of Inspire, each attack boosting attack based on Mita's own attack and support. This will scale by 5% of his attack and 3% of his support. A stack naturally falls off every 5 seconds or if the unit is hit. If that sounded confusing, basically Mita wants attack and support to increase his buff. The buff is strongest right as it's applied, as you have the full 5 stacks, and it slowly goes down. When I had Mita built for attack primarily at full Inspire stacks, it gave him around 200 more attack, which is pretty significant. Unfortunately, the buff decays so it loses value fairly quick, especially if you're getting hit. It's also pretty time consuming just to get this buff off, as you have to apply illusion 3 times, wait for the enemy to hit you each time, and then you get to fire your buff off again. It'd be pretty nice if there were some kind of gimmick to offset how long this setup is, but seems it's primarily meant for fights with multiple enemies. His counter and chain attack don't interact with this either, so they're pretty plain Jane. As for his ult, this requires level 2 tension, throws a big ball at the target which then sucks nearby enemies in for a short duration while also damaging them. I like that it's not just do some damage, but actually interacts with the field. This could potentially be useful in the future depending on content, say if we had waves of enemies or a larger field. The suck range is pretty decent, but gets even better with his first passive. Each level added boosts the effect range by 6.66%. At max, it's actually a pretty considerable distance it can pull. Now his second passive is probably what people would rather invest in, which makes his Inspire buff boost support as well. Each level added gives 2 support per stack, so 10 per stack at max, resulting in 50 support at max Inspire. For comparison, a support 4 plus substat gives 33.34, making the buff pretty substantial. Just again hard to coordinate if you're trying to damage max and Iroha ult due to the setup time for Mita. Realistically, if you're using Mita, you either like how fluid his moves are, or you're using him for his intended purpose, which is a buff bot, so probably just stick to maxing his second passive. Past that, I'd say max his support, then attack. His buff scales harder off of his attack, but realistically he's a supporting character, so it's probably more beneficial to boost your actual DPS's damage in chain attacks. But if you're buff maxing, go attack then support. Which leads into his gear. Of course this means you want to stack attack and support on this lad. Attacker set if you want to buff max, otherwise you want to run Enchanter or Trickster. Trickster for more support, Enchanter to extend the duration of his buff. At only a 25% increase though, this brings his buff up about a second per stack, so a little over 6 seconds instead of 5. Looking at Mita's dupes, his first dupe makes it so when illusion activates and auto dodge, there is a 25% chance illusion isn't removed. Now illusion only lasts 10 seconds, so you need to reapply it fairly often anyway. This is also a very low chance, so the odds of it coming up are slim. This is really just a oh neat moment if you happen to get hit multiple times in a row. Overall, pretty worthless. Next up, at 3 dupes, when he uses his Inspire buff, it will bounce off your ally toward the closest party member. This is great if you can really line up the buff to completely whiff Mita, but either way a great addition. And at max dupes, the duration of Inspire stacks go up to 7 seconds instead of 5. With an Enchanter gear set, this brings it up to 8.75 seconds per stack. This is actually super substantial and makes Mita much more viable, as just one stack falling off within 18 seconds isn't that bad. This gives Mita plenty of time to get another buff ready. Of course, this is all based on trusting in-game text. Based off one rough test I did though, as testing timing of buffs in combat is fairly unreliable. At max stacks with an enchanter set, a stack lasted around 8 seconds, give or take. As Mita is a damage supporter, he needs a good DPS to buff. Pick your poison, pairs well with Inoki and Miyu, or anyone else you want to run. He doesn't really love running with tanks, as it makes his job harder to rack up his energize stacks. I'd say anyone with some light healing capabilities to help when you take some accidental damage, or just slap another DPS on there. Maybe Geo if you want to see big numbers with his defense shred. As for tensions, I can't really wholeheartedly recommend anything for Mita specifically, as it's definitely better to build around anything besides your buff bot. If you really wanted to though, I'm going to throw Cascade in there as a try it out for yourself card, as I don't think his auto dodges are perfect evades. I've tried it, but the stamina recover is so small that it was hard to tell if it was doing anything at level 1. Otherwise you would want Defragment, as it will boost buff duration, which is just about all Mita could ask for. Going into combat, you pretty much just want to get hits in when you can and make sure the enemy always has illusion. This typically leads to just doing his strategy, wait to get hit, do it again, then when you're at max energize, buff away and repeat. Ideally, Mita would be ran as an AI. The unfortunate truth though is that this isn't great, since illusion taunts enemies. Mita will end up getting smacked around like Arisugawa came back home. In conclusion, I really like Mita. Until he's power crept, his ideal scenario is just making people that do big numbers do even bigger ones. I'd be interested if Iroha ult damage maxers have a place for him. Unfortunately, it's a lot to get him off the ground and be a real benefit to your team, but if you want to run him anyway, I hope this video was helpful. Thanks everyone for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, or don't. See ya.